Hello music fans, you're watching the Death by Unicorn channel, and I'm kicking off a set of 10 videos here. They're going to be a little bit different and new from what I've been doing recently on my channel. I've been more focused on my channel of talking about new music, but I'm going to do something new and talk about old music. I'm going to talk about my favorite albums from the decade of the 1970s, and I'm going to make one video for each year. This video is for the year 1970, and I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite albums that came out that year. But first I'm going to start with an honorable mention. My honorable mention today is Led Zeppelin with their album Led Zeppelin 3. This is their third album. They're a legendary rock band. It starts with the groovy rocker, The Immigrant Song, a very popular song of theirs, very good and memorable. The rest of the album is good too. It's just not as memorable and great as the rest of the albums on my 1970 list above this one, so that's why it only got an honorable mention. Now let's jump in with my number 10, which is Deep Purple and their album Deep Purple in Rock. This is the fourth album by this band, but it's the first with their legendary Mark II lineup that features Ian Gillan on vocals. This album, I think, is very ahead of its time. It's very influential to all of hard rock and heavy metal. The vocal performances are pretty intense and sometimes borderline ridiculous, especially on the song Childhood Time when they get into the crazy parts. They're epic, but definitely not for everybody. Number 9 is Emerson, Lake and Palmer with their self-titled debut album. They're a legendary prog rock band. Amazing keyboard and piano playing here. It had to be on my list. Number 8 is Yes with their album Time and a Word. This is their second album, and Yes hadn't quite found their amazing sound yet on this album, but they're still pretty good on this album. I love the bass work here and the vocal harmonies. They go on to do greater albums in the future in their career, but I still think the songs on this are catchy, just not quite as progressive as what would come next for Yes in their career. My number 7 is Pink Floyd with their album Atom Heart Mother. This is the album where Pink Floyd truly goes into prog rock territory, and they open the album with the epic title track that also features an orchestra. So they had done adventurous stuff before this. They've released adventurous stuff in the 1960s with their Syd Barrett era stuff, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Saucer Full of Secrets, and the very weird and bizarre Ummagumma. But I feel like this is where they kind of find their prog rock sound on Atom Heart Mother, and it's really good. Number 6 is the first metal album of all time, a lot of people say. It's Black Sabbath and their self-titled debut album. This is the band that started heavy metal. I love the opening title track, NIB, as well, is the other track that I like, but every song on here is great. They've got a lot of blues influence in their sound, but they really made it sound evil and demonic and kind of brought this horror theme and horror vibe. The opening track kind of like gives me vibes like modern doom metal would, like a stoner doom almost. Really love the sound. Great album. Number 5 is another one from Black Sabbath, Paranoid. They released their self-titled debut and their second album, Paranoid, in the same year. This contains iconic songs like War Pigs, Iron Man, and the title track, Paranoid. Though to be honest, I don't really need to hear that title track, Paranoid, ever again. I kind of find that song annoying. But the rest of the songs on this album, Paranoid by Black Sabbath, are all great. Electric Funeral and Hand of Doom really sound like great stoner doom metal songs to me. And number 4 is Gentle Giant and their self-titled debut album. They are just such an underrated, amazing progressive rock band. They are very quirky and experimental. All the players in Gentle Giant are virtuosos and multi-instrumentalists. Their songs are complex. It's not an easy album to listen to because it's so complex and out there, but it's very fun and it's very rewarding. Some of the songs have a bit of a medieval sound to them. They do a lot of interesting syncopated vocal harmonies, and that's kind of their signature sound. So if that sounds interesting to you and you haven't already checked them out, check out Gentle Giant. I think their later albums, they get even better than this album, but they still start out really strong here with a strong debut. Number 3 is King Crimson with their album In the Wake of Poseidon. This is their second album. They're a great progressive rock band, and some say that their debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King from 1969, is the first prog rock album, and I guess I could kind of agree with that. It's kind of the first full-blown prog rock album, but there may be some prog rock songs or proto-prog albums from other bands that came out before it. But In the Wake of Poseidon is great. It's a little bit of a rehash of their debut album. It kind of follows the template and the sound established there, and I don't think it's quite as strong as their debut In the Court of the Crimson King. But their debut album and this second album, In the Wake of Poseidon, are just both so strong that it had to place highly for me. So that comes in at number 3. Number 2 is going to be the Beatles with their album Let It Be. This is their 12th and final album by the most famous rock band of all time. It's the one they were making in the Get Back documentary that Peter Jackson made that was like 9 hours long or something, but you bet I watched every minute of that. This is not my favorite Beatles album by any means, as I think their albums in the 60s, every time they release an album in the 60s is pretty much my favorite album of the year. They kind of dominated the 60s anytime they put out music, but this is still a really great swan song. It features some great tracks. Can't go wrong with the Beatles' Let It Be album. And my number 1 album in 1970 is King Crimson with their album Lizard. Another band that released 2 albums in this year, just like Black Sabbath. This is King Crimson's 3rd album. It's jazzy progressive rock, and I like that it sounds so different from their first 2 albums. It's also cool that the title track on this is a 23-minute epic. One of the early examples of a sidelong prog epic, I know there were more, and we talked about Pink Floyd's Adam Hart Mother is another sidelong epic from this year. But gotta appreciate the innovators and the early prog bands that dared to do these 23-minute sidelong, like takes up the whole side of vinyl epic. The first part of that title track features guest vocals from John Anderson of Yes as well, so a nice example of featuring artists and collaborating with artists from other prog bands. It's just a really fun and unique album in their catalog, so I recommend checking out Lizard by King Crimson. And that's it for my 10 favorite albums of 1970. Let me know what you think of these down below, and what's your 10 favorite albums from 1970, or if you don't have a list of 10, maybe 5, or even just 1, what do you like from this year? And anyone want to try to predict what my favorites of 1971 might be, post those down in the comments as well, because that will be one of my next videos to follow this. So stay tuned for that. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see my video for 1971, and I'm going to do this all the way to 1979. Maybe at the end I'll even do like my top 25 albums of the whole decade, so you can kind of see which albums bubble up to the top and are my favorite of the whole decade. And that's it. See you next time. Peace out.